My name is Becky Sisneros, and today I just want to share the redemptive work that Jesus has done in my life. I came to Living Waters about 4 years ago because of the effects of childhood sexual trauma. And Living Waters is where I started to understand just at a deeper level, because at that point I had been to counseling for many years, both secular and Christian counseling, but there was still some just really deep wounding and pain that I couldn't figure out how to tap into. My story begins with being born into a single mother household. My mom and my dad married, and they were married for about 2 years. My uncle talks about their marriage being very difficult, that there was a lot of drugs and alcohol, and just deep brokenness. My mom very early on was sexualized a lot, and my dad had been sexually abused as a child. And so, as you can imagine, them coming together, the brokenness in their relationship was just, it was just doomed for disaster. And so they had my sister, my older sister, Norma, and 2 years later I was born. I later found out that my mom wasn't sure who my dad really was. She didn't know if who I think now is my dad, if he really is or isn't. And so that kind of helps me understand why I always felt like I was kind of born into like confusion and a darkness, and just feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, like I was unwanted. And so once my mom and dad divorced, I just remember being able, at this point, yes, being able to communicate. And I was, I'm thinking maybe, 5, 6, maybe 7 years old, and wanting to see my dad. And so my mom would put me on the phone and ask me to call him, and I would call him over and over and over and over. And most of the time, he did not pick up, and so I just figured, that I would just keep pursuing until finally he would pick up. And eventually he would get tired of the phone calls, and he would make an effort to come and visit my sister and I. Sometimes he actually would make it, many times he wouldn't. There would always be excuses. But what I do remember is that every time he came to pick us up, he always had kind of like the latest model of vehicle. I mean, maybe it was just because we didn't have anything that seemed like it to me, but it just always seemed like he had more than enough money to be pouring into his own things, but never having enough money to give my mom for my sister and I. So that just feeling that and experiencing that from, my father, just really, I just felt like I just wasn't worth his time. And so that kind of transferred into other men, and it transferred into other relationships, and I just never felt like I was worth anybody's time. And I needed to go far and beyond in order to somehow gain, somebody else's 10 minutes of their time, or 5 minutes, just whatever scrap that I could pick up. And so my relationship with my dad was, it never got really any better. There was times where I was exposed to very abusive things with him, and a partner that I remember him having, and so just being just feeling violated in that way, it just really broke me even deeper. And so currently I feel that I have forgiven my dad for a lot of things, but I do not have a relationship with him, and I don't know what the future holds in terms of that. And so in terms of my mom, things weren't any better with her. Unfortunately, she just was also deeply broken. She was out looking for love in all the wrong places. She also grew up without having a deep sense of who she was, because of my grandfather not being, present emotionally. But when we were with her, I think there's many times that I think about my relationship with her and really trying to understand what it was that she was thinking about and what she was struggling with. And I think about that because I kind of want to give her, in a sense, the benefit of the doubt, like that she did the best that she could with what she knew. But it's just so hard for me to actually be able to give her that benefit, because as long as I remember, she struggled so much with providing for my sister and I. And yes, of course, she was a single mom with 2 daughters, no education. She was a seamstress, and so work wasn't that great. But what I remember was that somehow she could never keep a job. And so what happened in these cases is that she would get a job in a certain location of the valley. She would pick us up from my grandmother's house, and we would go over, we lived close to wherever she was working. And that meant we had to leave Grandma and Grandpa's house. That meant we had to leave the school we were at. That meant that we had to leave the familiar things that any kind of stability that we had, and we were off with her once again. And so when that would happen, it was always the same story with me. I was very much overweight, and so every time I went to a new school, it was going through the same stuff over and over and over again. The new kids, the making fun of, the calling me names, and on top of that, to go home and to not know what boyfriend my mom had that time or what other men were there. And it was just that constant, just never knowing. Everything was always so uncertain and so very unsafe. And I feel like I think about it now, and it just seems like such a confusing time. I just never really fully understood what was going on. But in the midst of moving back and forth, I have there's 2 locations that I will always remember, because they were where a lot of the sexual abuse took place. And so one of the houses, my mom had rented out like an extra, I don't know what you would call it, casita in the back type of thing. And And so there was where my mom would let other men come in, and I remember my sister being at school and her letting these men come in and rape me, sometimes in exchange for drugs, sometimes in exchange for just being able to stay living where we were at, sometimes just because she was in drugs herself and drinking and just having these people. I mean, I just remember being so helpless, being so hopeless, thinking like, what the hell's wrong with me? Like, why does this have to happen to me? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, what do I have like written on me, or what is it about me that almost makes it seem like I'm worthless, like there's nothing of value in me, like there's nothing of value, like I could be just used and mistreated and nobody would care. There was various other instances of being raped. I remember being in an upholstery shop, and there was like a lower level there. And I think at that time, like I was maybe 3 or 4, just being taken down to that lower level to be raped. And then kind of coming back up to the top where my mom was sewing and just kind of hiding under the sewing machine and just kind of sitting there. I also remember being exposed to pornography very early on, and just seeing so many sexual things throughout my life, and while all of that was horrific, I think that what kind of just took everything over the edge is when I was being sexually abused by my mom. So my family was a family of secrecy. I mean, nobody knew, my mom, people knew my mom, and they just thought she was the best thing, the nicest person you have ever met, the most giving. And that could be very true for people who experience having a relationship with her. I don't know, early on, like her brothers and sisters, but the mom that I knew, the person that I knew that my sister knew, was far from who those other people thought she was. And so the secrecy is really what kept me bound in just that place. I asked myself, like, why didn't I say anything? Why didn't I, expose her? Or why didn't I do that? And other people ask me that all the time. And all I can think about is I deeply wanted to be loved. Like, I wanted to experience what it was to be loved. And quite frankly, ever since I can remember, that was the way that I was, quote unquote, being shown love, and the way that I was, quote unquote, giving love, all through these sexual encounters. And so I really just didn't understand that all of this was that wrong. Like, I just didn't. I know that sounds absolutely crazy, but that's just, yeah, it wasn't until I was getting to be an adult that I thought, wow, some of this stuff just seems a little odd. And so really, throughout my life and all of those experiences, the effects of all of that just took me to a place of despair, took me to a place of death. The shame was just overwhelming, like the shame of, there's something wrong with me. Like, there's something wrong with me. Like, that was it. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. I knew that there was something wrong with me, and that's why, all of this stuff happened. And so I lived in a place of despair and in a place of death, always contemplating what it would be like to be dead, if my car would run into this wall or would go off of this, bridge, that it would be kind of all over. Always thinking about just the worst case scenario and just everything. I was always thinking about that. My abuse lasted from about the age of, between 3 and 5 till early high school years. I would say maybe end of my junior high, beginning of my freshman year. And so throughout that whole time, there was various people that had sexually abused me. And so by the time I got to high school, I was still struggling with overeating. That was my number one addiction. Masturbation was also something that I did just to numb things, but also because sex was something that I was exposed to. I was being raped on a consistent basis, and it was just something that very familiar to me. I also lived in a fantasy world, whether it was contemplating suicide or whether it was fantasizing about some kind of sexual encounter, or just living in a whole different, place where I wasn't actually I didn't have to see the people I had to see, and actually feel what I was feeling, deep down inside. I just didn't want to feel all of that disgustness that was trapped deep down inside. And so there was definitely a lot of self-hatred. There was just a lot of hopelessness and helplessness around all of this. And so by my freshman year in high school, my mom had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and it was actually a stage 4 breast cancer. And so I remember taking her to get chemo every morning before going to school. And so I would drop her off and I would go to school, and then I would pick her up afterwards and take her over to my grandparents' house. And my grandparents were people who I felt the safest with throughout our childhood. Whenever my mom didn't have money to live somewhere, we would always end up at Grandma and Grandpa's house. And my grandma is the reason that my sister and I are alive, and that my sister and I are in somewhat, functional people in this world. And so, I would drop off my mom at my grandma's house for her to kind of get over all the effects of the chemotherapy. And it was during that time that she starting to, she realized that that death was close for her, and so she started going back to church. I knew of God. I knew about Jesus. My grandmother had taught my sister and I a lot about who God was, but I didn't know about an intimate relationship with Him. And so as my mom kind of goes back to church, she's seeking healing first of all from her cancer. But in the midst of that, we get plugged into the church youth group. And so there is where I feel like God started to do something in my life. I kind of had a sense that I was starting to hear from Him. I felt like I had the opportunity to be praying for some of the other young people praying for me. And so I had never thought about that until now as an adult. And I thought to myself, wow, like Jesus was with me even then, even when I really didn't know what it was to have a relationship with Him. And so we are in the youth group for maybe a year or two, and my mom's cancer just gets worse. And in 1995, she dies of breast cancer. And so when she dies, it was what many people describe as like her death opened up just this stream of pain and of trauma and of darkness and it was just so much that just came flooding out that I didn't know what to do with it. I immediately started going to counseling, but that just wasn't enough, and so I finally decided to admit myself into a behavioral health facility, because at that point I wasn't functioning, and the effects of just all the years of abuse just came just so heavy upon me. And so I was contemplating suicide, and so I thought, this is probably the only way that I'm gonna keep myself from actually killing myself. And so I admitted myself into a facility for I think it was about 2 weeks, and it's just the hardest thing ever being in there. I didn't get to see my grandparents. I didn't get to see my sister. And inside of there, it was just so challenging. There's so many people that were deeply broken, that were trying to commit suicide. I mean, I just think about being there, and that in and of itself, it's even more dramatic. But they were able to give me the medication I needed just to kind of stabilize my moods and stabilize my depression and anxiety. And I remember my grandma and my aunt coming to pick me up and just kind of putting me in the back seat. And I was so drugged up with all the medications they had given me that I kind of just fell over in the back seat and just slept. And I could hear my aunt telling my grandma, how is she gonna function this way? And so for the next, I would say 10-15 years, I would be going to counselor after counselor after counselor after counselor, just seeking help, just desiring to be able to break free from the shame, the secrecy, the self-hatred. despair, always thinking that somehow there has to be something more, but it would never happen. It's like I would get a little bit of healing, but at a certain point there was nothing more. As I said earlier, from secular counselors and Christian counselors, just trying to understand everything that was going on internally, trying to be able to heal, trying to be able to, ultimately what I was looking for was love. Like that's what I wanted from the very beginning. I wanted to be accepted, I wanted to belong, and I wanted to be loved. And still here in early, mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s, I'm still in search of the same thing, of wanting to be just loved. And so because I was not finding that, I was looking for it in all the wrong places, and I was giving myself away sexually to boyfriends, trying to find love. I was sometimes still am, but a people pleaser. Like, I wanted to do whatever anybody needed. I would make sure that it got done, and not only it got done, but it got done perfectly. And so that way, they would actually want to be with me. They would want to be able to pour into me. But I was just so parched inside, like just dry, that even if they would offer a little bit, it was just never enough. And I wanted more and more and more and more. And that was just too much for just one person to handle. During this time, I was also living with my grandparents. My mom had passed away, and so I'm living with them. I'm caring for them. My grandmother tries to give me as much love as she can, but in her brokenness, and she was only one person, like she couldn't meet all of my needs. And so things with food addiction and masturbation, living in fantasy, all of that just hyped up even more. And I just went spiraling down. On the outside, I looked like I had it all together. On the outside, I was a teacher. I excelled at what I was doing. I was a perfectionist. I mean, nobody would be able to tell. And that scared me, because that's exactly how my mom was. Like, nobody would have known what was behind what was behind that false, self that she carried around. And here I am, carrying on in a different way, but still having this false sense of who I am to portray to everybody else, hoping that it would bring love. And yet the real Becky behind all that, was actually never able to tap into any of that love. And so it wasn't until my mid-30s that I happened to come across a home church. And it was in this home church that I finally had the experience of what it was to know Jesus in an intimate level with other sisters in that home church. They wanted to know me. They wanted to know about my hurts and about my pain, and they wanted to sit and listen, and they wanted to take the time, and they made sure that I knew that they wanted to be there, that it wasn't because it was such a dread to be with me. Like, they deeply desired and wanted to be there with me. And so I was at that home church for about 10 years. I grew a lot in terms of the word. I grew a lot in terms of relationship with other women. Having relationship with men was still very difficult. but also having relationship with women sometimes also got a little difficult because of being sexually abused by my mom. There was some sexual confusion. Sometimes I had some stuff coming up when women kind of reminded me of my mom, or when there was something that was kind of just a little off, that I wasn't sure about, that felt unsafe. And so I would get all of these triggers starting to happen. I was triggered sometimes by women. I was triggered sometimes by men. And so there was times where I deeply wanted to be with sisters in Christ. But because of all of that wounding, I was not able to actually enter into relationships with them. And so I lived in isolation, and in that place of isolation, I was just dying. I was emotionally just dying inside, with really nothing coming in. And so, thanks to Jesus, the couple that lead that home church were connected with Melissa and Gary. And so that is how I became connected to Living Waters. And so as I went through the pilot program, as I mentioned in the beginning, I thought, well, here we go again, right? Another counseling, session. How is this going to be any different? Well, yeah, there's a group of women here, and now they're going to hear all of my crap. But at a certain point, I realized, as Melissa shared, she says, here's where, at this place, here is where you're going to come to confess the deepest, most shameful things that you were going to take to the grave. And I thought, whoa, that's, wow. I kind of wanted to look for the door and walk out. But I knew that it was either going to be there, or there was going to be nothing past that. And so I chose to enter in. I chose to reveal all the secrecy, everything from the sexual abuse, everything from my sexual confusion, everything about the shame, everything about my family origins. I shared everything in this group of women. And what happened in that group was that these women were praying on my behalf so that I could have an encounter with Jesus. And I did. I met Jesus for the very first time. And the very first time I said to him, where were you? Right? Where were you? Why did you let all this happen? I don't understand how people can say that you're so good when you let a little girl be raped over and over. And so I shared my anger, I shared my frustration, I shared my rage towards him. And there was absolutely nothing that I could say that would make him turn away from me. And so from very early on, while I didn't grow up in the Word, Psalm 27:10 was always in my mind. Whether my mom or dad forsake me, God will never, or Jesus will never. I know that's not the right terminology, but that's what I knew. And so in that moment, when I got to actually talk to God about all of this anger and rage that I had towards him, and for him to not turn away from me, and not only that, for him to choose to stay with me for the next 3-4 years, for the rest of my life, but in this case next 3-4 years, where he is entering in with me in every memory that comes up, because I still have memories. Even recently I have a new memory that's coming up, and I can invite him, and he shows up every single time, and he enters in with me, and he shows me where he's at, and he deals with the situation in there. Like, it's no longer that little girl in the situation by herself, not being able to do anything, but it's actually my Father. It's actually Jesus there that is the one that is taking on all of that, and that deals with everything. Like, all that little girl has to do is hold on tight to him, and he is able to bring her out of all of that. And so what I experienced at Living Waters was deliverance. I was delivered from so many strongholds that I had in my life that were just taking me to a deeper and deeper place of death. And so as I was delivered from all of that demonic oppression, there was this new sense of authority, this new sense of life, this new sense of purpose, this shattering of shame, where there is something good for me to do in this world. Like, I belong here. I have something good to offer. And so Jesus has really just given me, has redeemed my life completely. Like there is hope. At a point where I felt like things will never get any better than where I was, they have gotten. I don't even have a number to put on that, but it has been just the most beautiful thing that I have ever experienced with Jesus at the center. He has given me a life that is purposeful. He has given me a life that is worthy. And here's the thing, like, for the past couple of years, I've been in a place of rest, and that to me it just goes against everything I thought that I had to do in order to gain his love. Like, being in a place of rest and still being able to grow in him has completely shattered this idea of I have to do more, I have to perform, I have to strive, I have to do more and more and more in order to gain his approval and his love. Like, he has taught me what it's like to abide and to rest in him, and how he continues to restore all of the little parts within me that are shattered, that are broken, and that are deeply in need of being fathered. And so he is, God is just an unfailing love that I have received from him. And so it's out of that overflow that I get from him that I'm now able to pour into others. And so my desire in sharing my testimony is for others to have a sense of hope. Like, there is hope in the midst of so much destruction, so much deceit, so much secrecy, so much trauma, so much darkness. Like, there is hope in Jesus. And so I would encourage you to continue to seek the Lord. I would encourage you Yeah, I mean, and it's not because I volunteer for Love and Truth Network, but there is a program, Living Waters, that is a great process to be able to encounter the Lord in a deeper level. And here's the other beautiful thing that I believe in terms of Jesus, when he, because he has designed us to be in community. And so one of the things that I have learned through Living Waters as well is that it's a community that is willing to commit to walk with you for a lifetime. It's not, I'm going to walk with you for, a month or two and then see you later. Like, these are people that are committed to walking alongside of us, walking alongside of churches, for a lifetime. And so I just have, just such a deep sense of really what God is going to do through through my story. And I don't say that in a boastful way. It's a very humbling to be able to share such painful things in my story. But I do want to offer, even if it is a glimpse of hope for anyone who might be struggling with the effects of childhood trauma, just rejection, hopelessness, helplessness, despair, suicidal ideation, just all of that there is hope in Christ.